She came to his door with frozen fingers and nothing left to lose, and the rancher who hadn't smiled in 2 years made her an offer colder than the Wyoming winter. Marry me. Raise my sons. Don't expect love. She said yes. She had no choice. But neither of them knew what they were really agreeing to. Stay with me until the very end. You won't believe where this story goes. Hit like, subscribe, and drop the city you are watching from in the comments. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now let's go back to that bitter winter night on the Wyoming plains. The wind off the Laramie Range had teeth that night. Clara Ashworth had been walking for 3 hours in it, or what felt like 3 hours, though her mind had stopped tracking time somewhere around the moment her left boot split open at the sole and the snow began packing against her bare foot. She no longer felt that foot. She was fairly certain she no longer felt much of anything below her knees. And the part of her that was still rational, the part that had once stood in front of 40 school children and parsed the subjunctive mood with perfect composure, understood that this was not a good sign. The road was gone. That was the trouble. It had been there solid and reliable beneath 2 inches of powder. And then the wind had shifted and the drifts had moved, and suddenly Clara was walking through what appeared to be an unmarked white void with no landmarks and no stars and no sound except the howling that seemed to come from every direction at once. She had one direction left: forward. Forward because behind her was the town of Caldwell Creek, Wyoming territory, and the town of Caldwell Creek had made its feelings about Clara Ashworth perfectly clear. The school board had voted 6-1, the one being old Mr. Frazier, who taught at the church and had no actual vote, but had shouted his objection from the back of the room anyway to terminate her contract, effective immediately, citing what Chairman Harold Briggs called a fundamental incompatibility with the values of this community. What he meant was that she had stood up in front of the assembled parents and told them that the children of the Clearwater mine workers deserved the same geography primers as the children of the cattle barons. She had said it loudly. She had said it twice. She had, according to Mrs. Briggs, looked Harold directly in the eye while she said it, which was apparently the worst offense of all. They had given her 24 hours to vacate the schoolhouse apartment. She had packed what she could carry and walked out into a December storm with $18 to her name and no plan beyond North. North was where the Cade Ranch was supposed to be. She had heard about Nathaniel Cade from Diego Reyes, the foreman at the neighboring Whitmore spread, a broad-weathered man who'd said it matter-of-factly over a fence post, the way you'd mention a storm coming in. Cade's been through 3 housekeepers since Margaret passed. He's not easy, but he's fair, and he pays. If you're looking for work and you've got the spine for it, the man needs someone educated enough to manage those boys. She hadn't known then that she'd be walking to him through a blizzard. She'd pictured something more dignified. A letter, perhaps. An interview? Clara laughed at herself, and the laugh came out ragged and strange and frightened her a little. She was still laughing, or something close to it, when her right knee buckled and she went down into the snow. She stayed there for what felt like a long time. The cold was almost comfortable now, which she knew was the dangerous part. Her thoughts were getting loose at the edges, soft and wandering. She thought about her father, which she hadn't done in years, the particular way he'd smelled of ink and pipe tobacco, the way he'd called her his best student even before she'd become anyone's student at all. She thought about Boston, the academy, the day she'd received her teaching certificate and held it in both hands and thought, this is the beginning. She had not imagined that it might also be part of the end. Get up, said the rational part of her brain, the part that parsed subjunctive moods and stood its ground in front of school boards. You're not finished. Get up. Clara got up. She was not sure how much later it was when she saw the light. It was faint orange-yellow, visible only in flickers through the driving snow. And for a moment she thought she'd imagined it. Then it steadied and her body moved toward it before her mind had fully decided to lurching forward through the drifts with a kind of desperate animal purpose that had nothing to do with dignity and everything to do with survival. The structure materialized out of the white, massive, dark logs, a wide porch lamplight bleeding through curtained windows. Larger than she'd expected, larger than anything else for miles clearly. She climbed the porch steps on hands and knees when her legs stopped cooperating, and she found the door by touch, and she knocked. Nothing. She knocked again, harder, and then again, and her knuckles had no feeling in them, so she couldn't tell if she was making any sound at all, and she pressed her forehead against the wood and thought, if no one comes, you will die on this porch, and the thought was so specific and so calm that it was somehow more terrifying than panic. The door opened. He was tall, that was her first impression. Broad-shouldered, filling the door frame with dark hair silvering at the temples, and a face that the Wyoming winters had carved into something angular and severe. He was holding a lamp and the light threw sharp shadows across his jaw, and he looked down at her with an expression that gave away nothing at all. She tried to speak. Her jaw locked. The words she'd been rehearsing, "I'm looking for work. I'm a qualified teacher. I heard you needed someone for your sons," all of them frozen somewhere between her brain and her mouth. "You're the teacher," the man said, "the one they fired." It was not a question. She nodded. She was past the point of being stung by it. Something moved behind his eyes, not warmth, not sympathy, but something calculating and precise. He stepped back from the door. "Get inside," he said, "before you die on my porch." His name was Nathaniel Cade, and he ran Crow Creek Ranch with the efficiency of a man who had decided that feeling things was a luxury he could no longer afford. He did not help her across the threshold. He stood back and held the door and watched her half crawl, half stumble into the entry hall, and then he closed the door against the storm with a decisive click that sounded to Clara's still foggy brain like a judgment being rendered. The interior of the ranch house was not what she'd expected from a widower living alone with two children and a rotating cast of housekeepers. The floors were polished hardwood. The furniture was substantial in well-made leather, walnut, a massive stone fireplace occupying most of the far wall with a fire going in it that looked like salvation. Books on the shelves, a rug that had once been expensive. On the mantel, a small framed photograph of a woman with fair hair and a serious expression, and beside it a child's painted wooden horse. Clara stood dripping in the entryway and tried to remember how to form words. A woman appeared from the back of the house, dark-haired, compact, moving with the efficient authority of someone who had managed this household for a long time. She stopped when she saw Clara let out a sharp breath in Spanish and immediately turned back toward the kitchen. "Rosaria," the man said, and she was already responding. "CC, blankets, hot water, I know." She disappeared, still muttering. "Sit," Nathaniel Cade told Clara, and she sat more accurately. She lowered herself onto the nearest piece of furniture, which happened to be a leather settle near the fireplace, and then remained there while Rosaria and the fire did their work. It took the better part of an hour. She came back to herself in stages, feeling first then pain, then the humiliating awareness of what she must look like, a half-drowned woman in a ruined dress with the remnants of a boot on one foot and nothing but wet wool stocking on the other. She was wrapped in two blankets. She was holding a cup of something hot. The man who owned this house was standing near the window with his back partially to her, and he had not moved in some time, and she had the uneasy sense that he had been watching her without appearing to. "Thank you," she said. Her voice came out thin and scrape-sounding. "I'm sorry to impose." "You're imposing less than you would be if you'd frozen to death outside," Cade said without turning. "I'd have had to explain it to the boys in the morning." Clara looked at him. She had not survived Boston winters, an orphaned adolescence, and Harold Briggs's school board by failing to read a room. She straightened her spine as much as the blankets allowed. "I heard you've been through 3 housekeepers in 6 months," she said. Now he turned. His eyes were a particular shade of gray-green that caught the firelight, strangely light-colored and direct and not particularly kind. "Diego Reyes has a large mouth," he said. "He has a practical mouth. He told me what I needed to know." She wrapped her hands more firmly around the cup. "I'm told your sons need someone educated enough to teach them properly, and that the women you've hired couldn't manage the younger one's nightmares or the older one's temper. I'm a qualified teacher. I've handled difficult children, and I'm sitting in your house because I have nowhere else to go, which means I'm not going anywhere. That makes me more reliable than a woman who leaves when things get hard." The silence stretched between them. "You know nothing about my situation," he said. "I know your wife died 2 years ago in childbirth. I know your older boy is 7 and has been angry at the world since he lost her. And your younger one is 2 and doesn't remember her at all. And that might be the saddest thing I've ever heard." Clara's voice was steady. It cost her something to keep it that way. "I know you're too proud to admit you need help. And I know you wouldn't have let me in the door if you didn't already know that you do." He looked at her for a long time. The fire popped and settled. "There's a way this would work," he said finally. "If it works at all." "I'm listening." He moved away from the window, not toward her, but toward the fireplace, standing with his back to the heat, looking down at her with that flat, measuring expression. You'd marry me, legal and binding before the week is out. You'd take the boys on as your own, manage the household, presence yourself publicly as their mother. In private, we'd maintain separate rooms and separate lives. I have nothing to offer you in the way of. He paused over the word as if it were distasteful affection. I won't pretend otherwise, but you'd have room and board and a monthly allowance. If you leave before the year is out, you get nothing. If you mistreat either of my sons in any way, you get nothing, and I will make certain you never work in Wyoming again. Clara's stomach turned. She kept her face still. And what do you get, she said, beyond a mother for your children? Someone educated enough to teach them. Someone who won't run the moment things get difficult. His jaw was set. Someone who understands this is a transaction and not a courtship. She stood. She was still shaking slightly, but she stood because this conversation required standing. She was nearly as tall as he was, and she looked him in the eye without flinching. I'll accept those terms, she said with one addition. I'm not negotiating. You will for this. She kept her voice level. I'm giving up any possibility of a real marriage. I am agreeing to raise your sons knowing I'll never truly belong to this family in your eyes. If after one full year either of us wishes to end this arrangement, you will provide me with enough money to start over, not a fortune. 6 months of expenses. Enough to find work while I land on my feet. Something shifted in his expression. Not softened, exactly recalculated. 4 months, he said, not 6. Claire extended her hand. Then we have an agreement, Mr. Cade. He stared at her hand for a moment. Then he took it. His grip was firm and calloused and warm, and she felt it even through the numbness, and that surprised her. We'll go to town in the morning, he said. Judge Harlan can marry us at 10. Rosaria will find you something appropriate to wear. I have my own dress. She looked down at the ruined thing currently clinging to her. Somewhere. Rosaria will find you something appropriate to wear, he said again, as if she hadn't spoken, and turned for the door. He paused with his hand on the frame. The boys don't know about this yet. I'll tell them in the morning. The morning of the wedding. Better than giving Owen time to plan. He was gone before she could ask what Owen would be planning. Rosaria. Her full name was Rosaria Delgado Vasquez, and she had been with the Cade family since Nathaniel was born, and she made this clear in the first 5 minutes of knowing. Clara led her upstairs to a room that smelled of lavender and faintly of something else, something milky and soft, and Clara stopped in the doorway. This was Mrs. Cade's room, she said. It is the mistress's room, Rosaria said firmly. You will be the mistress. Come. She added after a pause. She was not a jealous woman. She would want someone to love her boys. Clara was too exhausted to argue with a woman who moved with that kind of certainty. She let Rosaria ease her out of the ruined dress, help her into a borrowed nightgown, and tuck her into a 4-poster bed with sheets that smelled of cedar. On the nightstand, a small book of poems, a hairbrush, a dried flower, and a glass. She lay on her back and stared at the ceiling. What have you done, she asked herself. What have you agreed to? The answer was whatever she had to, the same thing she'd been doing since she was 14 years old, and the cholera took her father and left her standing alone in a house that would be sold by the end of the month. You survive first. You figure out the rest later. She closed her eyes. The storm raged on outside, and somewhere in the house, a child called out in his sleep, and Clara heard boots on the floorboards moving toward the sound, and then a low voice, and then quiet. She had not expected that. She had pictured the man as holy stone. The boots on the floorboards told her something more complicated. Sleep took her before she could decide what. Morning came with Rosaria and coffee and the sound of a child's voice already raised in fury somewhere downstairs. That will be Owen, Rosaria said, pinning Clara's hair with calm efficiency. Senor Cade is telling him. Is it always like this? When he doesn't get what he wants, yes. Rosaria stepped back to assess her work. But it is worse when he is frightened. This is worse. Clara listened to the shouting. A crash. A door. I don't want a new mother. The words were indistinct, but the meaning wasn't. I don't want her. You can't make me. She heard Nathaniel's voice lower, measured, no anger in it that she could detect. Just something flat and immovable, like a wall being built. He's not telling him he has to love her, Rosaria said, reading her expression. Just that he has to respect her. He knows the difference. Does Owen? Owen will learn. But the dress Rosaria had altered for her was a deep charcoal wool with a white collar, austere but correct, appropriate for a winter ceremony or a business meeting, which this was essentially both. Clara looked at herself in the mirror and saw someone older than she felt. Someone who had made a decision and was walking toward it with her shoulders back. The ride to town was silent. Nathaniel drove. Clara sat beside him on the wagon bench, close enough that their arms nearly touched, far enough that they didn't. In the wagon bed behind them, Owen, a compact, dark-haired boy with his father's jaw and eyes that were already red from crying, stared at her with open and sustained hostility. Rosaria sat beside him with Henry on her lap, a small, round-faced toddler who had no opinion about any of this and was occupied with a mittened thumb. "You can't make me like her," Owen said loudly to his father's back. "I'm not asking you to like her," Nathaniel said, not turning. "I'm asking you to behave." "Why should I?" "Because I said so." "I hate you," Owen said, and his voice broke on the last word, and then there was silence except for the snow and the horses and the particular sound of a 7-year-old trying not to cry in front of witnesses. Clara looked at her hands in her lap. She did not speak. There was nothing to say. Judge Harlan performed the ceremony in 5 minutes in a room that smelled of old paper and boot leather. Clara repeated words she didn't feel. She accepted a ring that was a fraction too small. She recognized it with a jolt like cold water as the ring from the photograph on the mantel. And when Harlan said man and wife, Nathaniel nodded once, signed the papers, and turned toward the door. "Wait," Clara said. He stopped. "I need to know one thing," she said. "Do you regret this already?" His eyes were unreadable. "I don't regret things that are necessary, Mrs. Cade," he said. "I'd suggest you adopt the same policy." He left. Clara stood in the judge's office in a borrowed dress, wearing a dead woman's ring, married to a man who looked at her like a line item in a ledger, and thought, "All right, this is where you are. Now figure out how to survive it." She was very good at surviving things. So, the first night was the hardest. Dinner was a performance of silence, Nathaniel at one end of the long table, Clara at the other, Owen refusing to eat and staring at her with the concentrated malevolence only a bereaved 7-year-old can sustain. Henry was in Rosaria's arms and unaware of any of it, babbling happily over a bowl of mashed potato. "He broke a vase today," Owen said suddenly, and Clara blinked because the pronoun was wrong. Owen corrected himself viciously. "She broke it, threw it at the wall." "It was an accident," Clara said quickly. "No, it wasn't," Owen said. "I did it on purpose because I'm angry and she shouldn't be here, and I don't care what you do." The table went perfectly still. Rosaria, serving from the doorway, stopped mid-step. Nathaniel looked at his son for a long moment. "Go to your room," he said. "But now." Owen shoved back from the table and ran. The sound of his boots on the stairs, and then his door, and then the muffled sound of something else being thrown against a pillow. Clara set down her fork. "He's a child," she said. "He's in pain." "I'm aware of what he is." Nathaniel's voice was even. "He also broke something that belonged to his mother, and that requires a consequence. He doesn't need a consequence right now. He needs his father." The stillness that followed was different from the table silence. It was the stillness of a man who was not accustomed to being disagreed with. "Don't presume to tell me how to raise my son," Nathaniel said. "You've been here one day." "In that one day," Clara said, her voice steady despite the thumping of her heart, "I've shown more concern for his emotional state than you have. And I say that not to be cruel, but because someone has to say it." He stood. The chair scraped. "This conversation is over," he said. "I have work in the office." He left, and Clara sat alone in the lamplight, and Rosaria came and began clearing the plates without a word. "He is afraid," Rosaria said finally, quietly, "of me, of caring." Rosaria set down the plates. "You threatened him tonight. Not with your words, with your caring. He saw that you already loved the boys more than the last woman did after 3 months. That frightens him." Clara put her head in her hands. "This was a mistake." "No," Rosaria said firmly. "This was the beginning. Those are different things." Clara found Owen exactly where she expected, curled on his bed, face in his pillow, trembling with the effort of not making noise. She didn't touch him. She sat on the floor near the end of his bed and waited. After a long while, Owen lifted his face. "You don't know anything about our real mother," he said. No, Clara agreed. Tell me about her. The silence that followed was not hostile. It was something else, something considering. She sang to me. Oh, I see, Owen said at last. She smelled like rosewater. She promised she'd never leave, and then she did. My mother promised the same thing, and Clara said. She died when I was 14. Cholera, my father, 6 months later. Owen's eyes moved to her face for the first time with something other than anger in them. Then there was no one, Clara continued. No family. I became a teacher because it was the only work available to me, and because I loved it, I loved teaching, I loved the children, even the difficult ones. She paused. Especially the difficult ones. I'm not difficult, Owen muttered. I'm sad. I know, and I won't try to be your mother. I won't try to replace her, but I would very much like to teach you. Your father says you're reading below where you should be, and I think that's a problem we can fix. Owen was quiet. Can you teach me the things she was going to teach me before she died? He said finally. The question hit Clara somewhere soft and unprotected. She kept her expression steady. Tell me what she was starting, she said, and we'll begin there. Owen looked at her, really looked at her for the first time, and then he said, she was teaching me the stars, the names. She said every star has a story. They do, Clara said, and I know most of them. We can start tomorrow night if it's clear. He didn't smile, but the set of his jaw changed. You can't replace her, he said. No, but maybe I can be something else, something new. Owen looked at the ceiling. That's what P said you'd say, he muttered. He said you were smart. When did he say that? When he thought I was asleep. The boy turned on his side. Good night, Miss Clara. Not mother, not ma'am, Miss Clara. It was something. She was in the hallway, the door pulled nearly shut behind her when she nearly walked into Nathaniel. He was standing in the shadows of the corridor with his arms crossed and an expression she couldn't quite read. How long have you been there? She asked. Long enough. They looked at each other. You handled him well, Nathaniel said. The words seemed to cost him something. He's not difficult to understand. He's just hurting. Yes, a pause. So is his father. He said it without self-pity, just as information, a fact being acknowledged. Margaret used to say, he stopped. Go ahead. She used to say that the heart isn't broken by what it loses. It's broken by what it learns to expect and then doesn't get. He was looking past Clara now at something she couldn't see. She was better at all of this than I am. You're still here, Clara said quietly. You're still walking down the hall toward your children in the middle of the night. That counts for something. He looked at her. The lamplight made him look younger and somehow more tired. Good night, Mrs. Cade, he said. Good night, Mr. Cade. He moved past her toward Henry's room, and Clara stood in the hallway listening to his footsteps and then to his voice low and certain, soothing the little boy back to sleep. And she thought maybe he's not as finished as he thinks. She went to bed in Margaret Cade's room, in Margaret Cade's nightgown, wearing Margaret Cade's ring, and lay awake listening to the storm settle, and thought about what it meant to build a life from what the previous one left behind. Outside, the Wyoming winter did what Wyoming winters do. It kept going. It did not care whether you were ready. But Clara Ashworth, Clara Cade, now on paper and by law, was used to that. She had never waited to be ready. She had simply kept moving forward one frozen step at a time until the light appeared. She closed her eyes. She breathed. She let herself just for a moment rest. Tomorrow was its own territory. She would map it when she got there. The peace lasted 4 days. Clara fell into the rhythm of Crow Creek Ranch, the way water finds its level, not gracefully, not without resistance, but inevitably. She woke before dawn with Rosaria learned where the coffee was kept and where the firewood was stacked, and which floorboard outside Henry's room creaked badly enough to wake him. She learned that Owen ate his eggs only if they were not runny, that Henry refused anything green, but could be tricked if the green thing was hidden inside something yellow, and that Nathaniel Cade took his coffee black and his silence absolute until he'd had 2 cups of it. She did not push. She observed. She filed things away with the same systematic attention she'd once given to lesson planning, because this household was, in its way, a classroom one with extremely high stakes and no curriculum guide. Mornings were for teaching. She commandeered the parlor table, cleared away the hunting catalogs and ranch ledgers, and set Owen to work with the 3 books she'd salvaged from her trunk, a battered copy of Robinson Crusoe, a primer in basic arithmetic, in a slim volume of natural history with illustrations she'd treasured since the Boston Academy. Owen came to the table each morning, with his jaw set and his arms crossed, prepared to resist, and each morning Clara simply opened a book and started reading aloud without looking at him, and within 10 minutes he was leaning forward with his elbows on the table and his chin in his hands. He was smart, startlingly, almost embarrassingly smart, the kind of quick mind that had been under-challenged and had turned the excess energy inward into anger. Within 3 days he was reading passages from Crusoe aloud, stumbling over the longer words but pushing through them with gritted determination. And when Clara told him he was reading 2 full grades above where he'd been assessed, his face did something complicated in private that she looked away from to give him room. Henry was easier in the way that 2-year-olds are easy, boundless, uncomplicated, operating entirely on sensation and sound. He called Clara Mama the second morning, not meaningfully, just reflexively, the way he called every woman in his orbit by the same word, and when she started to correct him, Owen said flatly, "He doesn't remember. He was too little." And the three of them sat with that truth for a moment, and then Henry demanded a story, and the moment passed, and Clara read to them both from the natural history book, while the winter pressed against the windows. She was reading to them, Henry in her lap, Owen beside her with his shoulder just barely touching her arm, in a way she was quite sure he had not noticed when Nathaniel came in from the cold and stopped in the doorway. Snow on his coat, exhaustion in the line of his mouth. He stood there longer than he needed to, watching the three of them, and Clara kept reading and let him watch. "Lesson's going well," he said when she finally looked up. "Owen is remarkable," she said. "He reads the way some people breathe like it's necessary." Something moved across Nathaniel's face. "He takes after his mother," he said, and turned away before she could respond. That evening, after the boys were in bed, she found him on the front porch despite a temperature that had dropped well below freezing. He was standing with his hands on the railing, looking out at the darkness, where the land should have been visible and wasn't. "You'll catch your death," she said from the doorway. "I know this cold," he said. "It doesn't bother me." She pulled her shawl around her shoulders and came out anyway, standing beside him at the railing, with a careful foot of space between them. "I've been trying to understand something," she said. "You could have hired a governess, a woman with qualifications and references, and no need to be married to you. Why didn't you?" Nathaniel was quiet for a long time. The wind moved through the spruce trees at the edge of the yard. "A governess can leave," he said. "If Owen has one of his rages, or Henry cries all night, or the weather is bad for a week, or the work is harder than she expected, she can leave. She has no reason to stay." He paused. "A wife has reasons." "You mean she's trapped?" "I mean she's committed." He turned his head to look at her, and in the dark his face was harder to read than usual. "I needed someone who couldn't just walk away. From my boys. From this." He gestured at the black expanse of the ranch. "I had to be sure." Clara considered that. "There's something else," she said. "You didn't tell me everything. About why you needed someone quickly." He was very still. "There's been trouble," he said. "Cattle gone missing. 3 ranches hit to the south and east, organized, well-armed. They know what they're doing." His hands tightened on the railing. "And they've been asking questions. About this property. About how many hands I keep. About my family." The cold seemed to drop another 10 degrees. "They're looking for vulnerabilities," Clara said. "Yes." His voice was flat. "A man with 2 children and no wife is a different target than a man with a family and a household. I needed," he stopped, reconsidered. "I needed someone here who would protect the boys if something happened to me. Someone who wouldn't run." Clara looked at the darkness. "You used me," she said. "Not an accusation, a fact." "Yes." No deflection, no apology. "I'm sorry for it, but I needed to know my sons were safe." She breathed out slowly, watching her breath cloud in the cold air. "All right," she said. He turned to look at her. "You should have told me," she said. "You should have been honest about the danger. But I understand why you weren't, and I'm not leaving, so all right." She met his gaze. "Tell me what I need to know. If something happens, tell me what to do." He told her. There was a hidden room off the boys' bedroom behind the bookshelf on the north wall, a door that latched from inside with water and food stored in case of emergency. If she heard gunfire, she took the boys there and did not come out for anyone but him, Diego or Rosaria. She memorized it the way she memorized lesson plans exactly, completely, without drama. Thank you, he said when she nodded to show she understood, for not falling apart, for not making this more difficult than it already is. They stood together in the cold for another few minutes, not speaking, and then the wind picked up and Clara's teeth began to chatter despite her best efforts, and Nathaniel said, "Go inside," without looking at her, and she went. She lay awake for a long time that night, listening to the sounds of the house, the creak of the roof timbers, the settle of the fire, Diego's footsteps on the porch as he made his rounds. She thought about the calculation Nathaniel had made when he'd let her in the door. She thought about her own calculation. She wondered if either of them had understood what they were really agreeing to. A transaction, he'd said, not a courtship. She pressed her hands flat against the cold sheets of Margaret Cade's bed and closed her eyes. She was a teacher. She understood that the most important lessons were the ones you didn't see coming. Diego Reyes came in from the north pasture on a Wednesday afternoon with the news. He came fast, his horse blowing hard, and Clara heard him shout for Nathaniel from the kitchen window and felt something tighten in her chest before she knew why. She gathered the boy's Owen, who looked up from his arithmetic with a child's uncanny instinct for disaster, and Henry, who was building something architectural and unstable with dried beans on the kitchen floor, and brought them upstairs on the pretext of continuing their lessons, and sat with her back straight and her voice steady while she heard the men's voices below terse and low and urgent. When she finally heard Nathaniel's boots on the stairs, she was ready. He stood in the doorway with his hat still on and his face set in the particular way it got when he was containing something large. They hit 3 more ranches, he said, including the Whitmore spread to the south, burned a barn, shot a hand who tried to stop them. His eyes moved to Owen, then Henry, then back to Clara. They asked about this ranch by name, asked how many people were living here. Owen had gone very still. "Boys," Clara said, keeping her voice light, "why don't you take Henry to his room and show him how to stack the blocks you made?" "I want to hear," Owen said. "I know, go anyway." He looked at her, that measuring adult serious look he had, and then he took Henry's hand and went. Clara turned to Nathaniel. "How long?" she said. "Don't know. Could be days. Could be tonight." He came into the room properly, closed the door behind him. "I'm bringing the hands in closer. Diego's already started. We're moving the herd to scatter them, make the property a harder target." He looked at her steadily. "You remember what I told you? About the room?" "Yes. If you hear anything, anything at all, anything that sounds wrong." "I remember." She stood. "What about weapons? What's available in the house if I need it?" A pause. "Then there's a rifle in my office. Second drawer of the desk loaded, and—" He hesitated, which was unusual for him. "My wife kept a small pistol. Owen has it, I think. I knew he'd taken it, and I didn't. I'll speak to him." Clara," she said gently. He stopped, closed his eyes briefly. "Clara," he repeated. "I'm sorry, don't be, go do what you need to do." She held his gaze. "We'll be fine." He looked at her for a moment in the way he sometimes did, like he was adding things up and not quite arriving at the expected sum. Then he nodded once and went. Clara sat with Owen that evening after Henry was in bed. She did not ask about the pistol directly. Instead, she sat on the floor beside his bed the way she had the first night and let him talk himself toward it. "Are they coming here?" he asked. "Your father thinks they might try." "And what happens if they do, Mom?" "Your father and Diego and the hands will stop them." "What if they can't?" Clara looked at him. He was 7 years old with his father's jaw and his mother's eyes, and he was watching her the way children watch adults when they've decided to measure the truth against the answer they receive. "Then I will," she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he got up, went to his closet, and brought out the wooden box. "I've been keeping it since she died," he said, holding it out. "I took it from her room. I know Pa probably knows and just never said anything." He opened the lid. Inside, a small revolver, compact and cold. "She showed me once. She said a smart woman always keeps protection." Clara took the box. Her hands were steady, which surprised her. "Your father doesn't need to know you gave it to me," she said. "No." Owen looked at the box. "Promise me you'll use it if you have to." She looked at him, this small, fierce, heartbroken boy, and said, I promise who I ain't. He nodded once with his father's precise gravity and climbed back into bed. Miss Clara. Yeah, my mother would have liked you. She liked people who said true things. Clara picked up the box and left before he could see what that did to her face. The attack came on a Friday. It came at 9 in the evening, which Clara later understood was deliberate late enough that the boys would be drowsy early enough that the ranch hands hadn't yet changed watch and were caught mid-transition. She was in the parlor reading Crusoe aloud while Owen followed along and Henry dozed against her side, warm and trusting, in the particular way of small children who have not yet learned how much the world can go wrong. The first shot shattered the front window, glass across the floor. Henry's eyes flying open, Owen scrambling off the sofa. Clara was already on her feet, already moving the book, sliding off her lap and hitting the floor as she threw herself over Henry, pulling Owen down with her other arm, getting between the children and the window, with the instinctive ferocity of something that has decided it is a mother whether the paperwork says so or not. Nathaniel burst from his office with his rifle. Through the roar in her ears, gunshots, horses, men, shouting in the dark, she heard him, "Get them upstairs." Now, she didn't wait. She had Henry in her arms and Owen by the hand, and she ran. The stairs, Owen's room, the bookshelf. She pulled it, remembered which side, found the latch, got the door open, pushed them through. "Stay," she said. "Don't make a sound. Don't open this door for anyone but your father or Diego." "You're coming in," Owen said. It was not a question. His voice was perfectly level in a way that cost him everything. "In a moment." She pressed the revolver into his hands. "If anyone comes through this door who isn't family, Miss Clara, you protect your brother." She held his gaze for 1 second, too. "I trust you." She closed the bookshelf. She stood in the hallway for a heartbeat, listening to the sounds of the house being attacked, glass breaking wood, splintering, the percussive thunder of gunfire that she felt in her chest. And then she went back downstairs because she could not hide while her family fought. Rosario was in the kitchen with a lamp in one hand and a calm expression that Clara would think about for years afterward. "I was wondering when you'd come down," Rosaria said. "What do we do?" Rosaria pointed to the counter where 6 bottles were lined up, each one packed with a cloth wick soaked in cooking oil. "We keep them away from the house," she said. I shoot, you throw. You can shoot. I have been on this ranch for 30 years. Rosaria said, picking up Nathaniel's spare rifle with a matter-of-factness that settled the question permanently. Clara picked up the first bottle. Through the kitchen window, she could see the burning barn. The fire had taken hold fast, painting the whole south yard orange and lurid, and moving through the smoke and the orange light, 3 men working toward the back of the house using the chaos as cover, expecting no one to be watching from inside. She lit the cloth. She threw it through the broken window above the sink. The bottle hit the ground 6 feet in front of the nearest man and erupted in a wall of fire, and the man scrambled backwards shouting, and Clara was already lighting the second one. "Good," Rosaria said, and shot twice through the same window with no wasted movement. They worked in a strange and terrible partnership, Clara, throwing Rosaria, firing, the two of them moving from window to window, watching the patterns, keeping the back approach covered. Clara's hands blistered in the first few minutes. She didn't notice. There was no room in her mind for anything except light, throw, move, light, throw, move. Then she heard it, a single cry from the front of the house, not a stranger's voice, a familiar one, ragged with pain. She was running before she'd made the decision to run. Through the parlor, past the overturned furniture, and the broken glass to the front door, she wrenched it open and saw Nathan on the porch steps on his hands and knees, with blood spreading dark across the left side of his shirt, and Diego standing over him with a rifle trying to hold 2 men back and losing ground. Clara grabbed the iron poker from the fireplace stand beside the door. She was not a large woman. She had never struck anyone in anger in her life. She walked out onto that porch and swung the poker at the nearest man with the complete and focused fury of someone who has decided that there is nothing left in this situation to be afraid of because the worst possible thing is already happening and she refuses to allow it. The man went down. The second man turned. Surprised, people are always surprised when a school teacher hits them, and Diego used the moment, and the second man went down differently. "Get him inside," Diego said, not wasting time on anything else. Clara dropped the poker and grabbed Nathaniel under the arms and pulled. He was heavy. He was heavier than she had any right to manage. She pulled anyway, dragging him backward across the threshold, her boots skidding on the blood-slicked wood, a bullet passing close enough to the left of her head that she felt the air move, and she kept pulling. Inside. Door. She got it closed, and Diego got the bar across it, and then Clara was on her knees on the parlor floor with her hands pressed against the wound in Nathaniel's side, and her whole body shaking with a fine high tremor that she was doing her best to ignore. "Look at me," she said, "Nathaniel. Look at me." His eyes found hers, unfocused but present. "You're not dying," she said. "I won't permit it." Something that might in other circumstances have been a smile crossed his face. "That's not how it works," he said. "It is tonight. Stay with me. Talk to me." She pressed harder. The blood came fast, and she made herself not look at how fast. "Tell me about Margaret. Tell me how you met her." "County Fair." His voice was thread thin. "She wore yellow, came right up to me, asked if I could dance. Could you, no, Dow." A pause, a breath that cost him. "Learn for her." "Good." Clara pressed harder. "Rosaria, I need bandages and hot water and something to use as a compress right now." "Coming right," Rosaria said from somewhere behind her. "Don't go to sleep," Clara said to Nathaniel. "I mean it. You have two boys upstairs who need their father, and I am not explaining to them that I let you die on your own parlor floor, so you are going to stay awake and you are going to be fine." His hand found her wrist. His grip was weak but deliberate. "Clara," he said, "I know, I'm here, I've got you." She felt her own tears before she knew she was crying, not grief, not fear, something more complicated and more fierce than either. "I've got you, just stay." Outside, the gunfire was ebbing. She could hear Diego shouting orders, horses moving, the particular sound of a fight that is turning. She did not allow herself to think about what it meant if they were losing. She focused on the wound, on the pressure, on his face. "You are not dying," she thought at him, with every ounce of the ferocity that had been getting her through impossible things since she was 14 years old. "Not tonight, not when we have only just begun." He stayed, his eyes stayed open, and his hands stayed on her wrist, and Rosaria came with the supplies, and together they worked Clara's hands sure and steady, in a way she would not understand until later when she was alone and could afford to shake, and by the time Diego appeared in the doorway to say, "They're gone," we held them. The wound was packed and bound, and Nathaniel Cade was breathing in the slow, deep rhythm of the unconscious. Alive. Genuinely, stubbornly, inexplicably alive. Clara sat back on her heels and looked at her hands, red to the wrist, trembling now, and she let them tremble, because there was no one left to be steady for except herself, and she had always been the last person she bothered with. "Senora," Rosaria's hand on her shoulder. "You need to get the boys." Right, the boys. She went upstairs on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. She found the bookshelf, pulled it open. In the dark of the hidden room, Owen was sitting against the wall with Henry asleep in his lap, and the revolver held properly in both hands pointed at the door. He lowered it when he saw her face. "P," he said. "He's hurt. He's going to be all right." She got down on her knees and opened her arms, and Owen came into them carefully because of Henry, but he came and pressed his face against her shoulder and said nothing at all for a long time. "You said you'd protect us," he said finally, muffled against her collarbone. "I did," Clara said. "You went back downstairs." "I did that too." Owen was quiet. "Then you're brave," he said. "Like Mama was." Clara held him tighter and did not trust herself to speak. She got them settled in Nathaniel's room, Henry in the center of the large bed, Owen beside him. Both of them clinging to each other with the specific exhaustion of children who have been frightened past endurance. She sang the only lullaby she knew all the words to, a simple old thing her father used to sing, and they were both asleep before she reached the second verse. She went back downstairs. She sat beside the sofa where they'd moved Nathaniel and watched him breathe. Diego appeared in the doorway at some point. His hat was gone, and there was a cut above his left eye that he had not bothered to address. "We lost 2 hands," he said quietly. "Jenkins and the new boy Marsh. 3 more wounded. We got 5 of them. The rest ran." He looked at Nathaniel. "How bad?" "He'll live." Clara heard herself say it with a certainty she could only partially account for. "But he needs weeks of rest. You're in charge of the ranch until he's back on his feet." Diego looked at her for a moment with something shifting in his expression, a recalibration. "Yes, ma'am," he said. When he was gone, Clara put her head in her her hands and allowed herself very briefly the luxury of falling apart. It lasted about 4 minutes. Then she straightened her spine and went back to watching Nathaniel breathe because someone had to, and she was the one who was here. Toward dawn, his eyes opened. "The boys," he said immediately. "Asleep, fine. Brave Owen especially." He let out a long breath and closed his eyes again. "You went back downstairs," he said. "Everyone keeps pointing that out. Because you were supposed to stay in the room. I was supposed to protect your family. I made a judgment call about the best way to do that." She looked at him steadily. "Do you want to discuss it or do you want to stay alive? Because you can only do one of those things right now." His mouth curved, just slightly. It changed his face, made him look for one unguarded second like the man he had probably been before grief had calcified around him. "You threw firebombs at armed men," he said. "That was Rosaria's idea. I just had good aim. You dragged me across a porch with someone shooting at you. I had motivation." He opened his eyes again, really looked at her, the kind of looking he rarely permitted himself or rarely permitted her to see. "I thought I was building a wall," he said. "Hiring you, marrying you, putting something solid between my boys and the world." He paused. "I didn't consider that the wall might decide to fight back." "You should have," Clara said. "I have been fighting my whole life. You simply hired me to do it for your family instead of my own." "It's your family too," he said very quietly. The room was still. Outside the window, the sky was beginning to pale at the edges, that particular steel blue that precedes actual dawn, when the world is holding its breath. Clara looked at him. "Get some sleep," she said. "I'll be here." "I know," he said, and closed his eyes. She sat in the chair beside him as the light came up over the Wyoming plains, and she thought about transactions and about what they become when you're not watching, and about the extraordinary danger of choosing even provisionally, even out of desperation, to care about someone. She had come to this ranch to survive. She was beginning to think she might have done something more than that. She did not put a name to it yet. It was too new and too frightening and too large for naming. She just sat with it and watched Nathaniel Cade breathe and let the dawn come in. Dr. Alden Patterson arrived at mid-morning on a borrowed horse with a black bag and the expression of a man who had seen his share of bad nights. He examined the wound with professional efficiency while Clara stood by and Rosaria hovered near the door, and Nathaniel, semi-conscious, made occasional efforts to be helpful that no one paid attention to. Patterson unwound the compress, looked at the stitching, and sat back on his stool. "Clean wound," he said. "Gone straight through, missed the major vessels. Whoever packed this knew what they were doing." He looked at Clara with the specific appraisal that competent people give each other when they find unexpected company. "You do this with help. Done this before, Bo?" "No." Patterson repacked his bag. "Keep it clean. Change the dressing twice daily. No riding, no lifting, no significant exertion for 4 weeks minimum. He'll be weak for a while. That's normal, not a complication." "But Mrs. Cade," he stopped, looked at her directly. "Another hour of bleeding like that, and we'd be having a different conversation." After he left, Clara went upstairs. She sat on the edge of Margaret's bed, her bed, and put her face in her hands and cried. Not the controlled, purposeful weeping she sometimes allowed herself at the end of particularly hard days, but real crying, the kind that comes from the place where fear and relief are indistinguishable from each other, where the distance between what happened and what almost happened is so narrow you can see through it. She cried until she was empty, and then she washed her face and went back downstairs. Owen was already at Nathaniel's bedside when she arrived. He was sitting in the chair she'd vacated, very straight, with his hands on his knees, watching his father sleep, with the same concentrated attention he brought to difficult passages in Crusoe. Henry was on the floor beside him, building something optimistic with a set of carved blocks, occasionally looking up at his father's face, and then going back to his blocks with the practical adaptability of a 2-year-old. "He woke up for a bit," Owen said, without looking at her. "He asked where you were." Clara sat on the low chest at the foot of the sofa. "What did you tell him?" "That you were upstairs, that you'd been up all night and needed sleep." Owen paused. "He said good. He said you'd earned it." The boy finally looked at her. "Did you really drag him in from the porch?" "Diego helped. Diego said you did most of it. Diego is generous." Owen considered this. "Pa said something when he was half asleep. He said, The boy stopped, chose his words with uncharacteristic care. He said that he'd made a mistake thinking he could keep everything at arm's length forever, and that the ranch needed a mother for longer than a year. Clara was very still. He said that to you, she said. He said it to the ceiling. I don't think he knew I was there. Owen picked up one of Henry's blocks and turned it over in his hands. I think he was talking about you. Clara looked at Nathaniel's face, the lines of pain there. Even in sleep, the silver at his temples, the mouth that was so rarely at rest, and she felt the thing she had not yet named move again. That living, inconvenient, complicated thing. Your father is very private, she said carefully. I know. Owen set the block down. So are you. He looked at her. But you went back out there, for him, when you didn't have to. His voice was a child's voice, matter of fact and absolute. That's not a transaction, Miss Clara. That's something else. She did not have an answer for a 7-year-old who was probably right. Go get breakfast, she said. Rosaria will have something ready. Owen went. Henry went after him, carrying 2 blocks and trailing cheerful noise. Clara sat alone in the quiet room and listened to Nathaniel breathe. After a while, she took his hand. Not dramatically, not romantically, just practically, because he was there and she was there, and someone had to decide that the distance between them was small enough to cross. She held it until he stirred, and his eyes opened, and he found her face. How long was I out? He said. Most of the morning. Patterson was here. He says you'll make a full recovery. Good. He says 4 weeks of rest. Impossible. He also said that if you tear those stitches, he won't be responsible for what happens. Clara met his eyes. And neither will I. Nathaniel looked at her. The look was unguarded in the way that pain sometimes makes people unguarded, stripped of the usual careful management. You stayed, he said. I told you I would. People say things. His hand under hers turned slightly, not gripping, but present. Then they find reasons not to. I don't work that way. A silence. Then, I know that now. On, he closed his eyes again, but some of the tension had left his face. Owen came in earlier. Talk to me. I know. He called you Paul. A pause. He called you brave. He said you were like Margaret. He opened his eyes again, and something was in them that she couldn't quite read, but that was not cold. That was not the careful vacancy he usually maintained. She was the bravest person I knew. I don't say that lightly. Clara looked at their hands. You don't have to say anything at all, she said. No, he said, but I am going to. He did not say more than that. Not then. He was not a man who found confession easy, and the pain was taking him under again, and she could see it. But he held her hand for another hour before he slept, and she led him in the distance between them, which had been measured in deliberate feet since the night she'd arrived on his porch, was now something smaller and less certain. He healed badly in the sense that he healed impatiently, which Clara had expected, and with more grace than she'd anticipated, which she had not. He accepted her management of the household without the armed resistance she'd been prepared for. He accepted Rosaria's fussing. He accepted with visible effort and only occasional lapses into stoniness the boy's presence on his recovery bed, Henry crawling over him with the purposeful clumsiness of a toddler, Owen bringing him books and reading passages aloud in his careful, earnest voice, while Nathaniel listened with his eyes closed in a small, unguarded expression on his face that he appeared to be entirely unaware of. It was Owen who changed first in the way that children sometimes change all at once, rather than gradually a decision made internally and then implemented without announcement. On the 4th day of Nathaniel's recovery, Owen came downstairs in the morning, sat at the table and said to Clara, "Can we do the stars tonight if it's clear?" And that was that. No ceremony, no acknowledgement of any prior position. Just, we are past that now, we are doing this. She taught him the stars that night. They wrapped in blankets on the porch, Nathaniel asleep inside Henry, asleep upstairs, the two of them with their heads tilted back to the Wyoming sky, and Clara named every constellation she could find and told him the stories behind each one. Orion, Cassiopeia, the Pleiades. Owen listened with his whole body leaning forward, asking questions that were better than her answers. My mother was going to teach me this, he said during a silence. I know. She used to say the sky was a book that everyone could read, even people who couldn't read books. His breath clouded in the cold air. She was very smart. She sounds like she was. You're smart too, you too, Owen said in a tone that suggested this was a fair assessment rather than a compliment. Different smart. She knew how to make things feel safe. You know how to make things make sense. He pulled the blanket tighter. I think maybe we needed both. Clara looked at this 7-year-old who spoke like someone older and felt something in her chest shift definitively. You know, she said carefully, it would be all right. It would be more than all right if you wanted to call me something other than Miss Clara. I'm not asking you to, I'm just saying it would be all right. Owen was quiet for a long time, long enough that she thought he'd decided to leave it. Then, not yet, he said, but maybe soon. She nodded. That was something. That was, in fact, quite a lot. News of the attack spread through Caldwell Creek with the speed that bad news always travels in small communities, and the response surprised Clara. She had expected Judgment, the former schoolteacher who'd married in desperation, who'd been fired for speaking out of turn, who had no place here, and no history, and no claim. She had expected the polite coldness that she'd received at the courthouse wedding, or worse. Instead, Diego told people what had happened. He told it matter-of-factly and without embellishment, the way he did most things. Mrs. Cade threw burning bottles at 8 armed men and dragged the boss in from the porch, with someone shooting at her back in the town of Caldwell Creek, which had seen its share of rough winters and difficult women, and knew the difference between one who stayed and one who ran recalibrated. Women came to call with food and apologies. Men stopped in to check on Nathaniel and nodded to Clara with a directness that was respect rather than dismissal. The woman who had replaced her at the schoolhouse, a young teacher from Cheyenne named Miss Paulson Ernest, and somewhat overwhelmed, came to ask for advice on the mine workers' children. And Clara spent an afternoon talking through lesson plans with her and felt something that she recognized distantly as the professional pleasure she'd thought she'd lost for good. The town has decided you belong here, Rosaria observed one evening while they were cooking. Because I threw fire at people. Because you fought for what was yours. Rosaria kneaded bread with the unhurried efficiency of someone who has been doing it since before Clara was born. Americans respect that, especially out here. Nobody cares where you come from if you're willing to do the work. She paused. Also, you made Senor Cade smile. Once, Clara said. Once is more than the last 2 years have managed. Nathaniel was not supposed to be out of bed. He was, however, out of bed in his office at his desk working through the account books with Diego at his shoulder and a pained expression that he was doing his best to keep off his face. Clara walked in at 3 in the afternoon, set a cup of coffee on the corner of the desk, and said nothing. He looked up. Thank you, he said. I didn't come to bring you coffee. I came to tell you that if you don't take the weight off that side for at least 2 hours this afternoon, Patterson will know because I will tell him. Diego cleared his throat. I'll just check the fences. He was gone before the sentence was finished. Nathaniel set down his pen. I'm not accustomed to being managed. I've noticed. She sat in the chair across from him without being invited. You're also not accustomed to accepting help or showing weakness or admitting that you're still in significant pain. I understand that, but the ranch will not fall apart if you spend 2 hours on the sofa. Diego is capable. I know Diego is capable. Then this is about something else. He looked at her. That look again, the careful adding things up look. When Margaret was dying, he said, I couldn't do anything. I stood there and watched, and there was nothing to be done, no decision to make, no action to take that would change the outcome. I have spent the last 2 years making sure I am never in that position again. If there is something to be done, I do it. Clara was quiet for a moment. That's why you never went after Owen, she said slowly, when he was at his worst. You didn't know what to do, and so you didn't move. Something in his expression shifted. He needed emotion, and I don't. He stopped. Tried again. I'm better at action, at decision, not at the other things. I know, Clara said. That's why you married a woman who is better at the other things. She leaned forward slightly. So let me do that part. Let me manage the house and the boys and Patterson's instructions while you manage the accounts and the ranch and Diego. That's the arrangement. Remember, he looked at her for a long moment. You're redefining the arrangement, he said. I'm describing what it already is. Another long pause. Then very quietly, all right. All right, she agreed. Now go lie down. He went, which surprised her more than anything that had happened in the last week. She sat in his office for a moment alone, surrounded by his books and his ledgers and the particular smell of leather and tobacco that she had, without noticing, come to associate with safety. She thought about arrangements, about what they look like from the outside and what they become from the inside, about the distance between a transaction and a choice. She was not in love with him. She was clear-eyed enough to be honest about that. But she was choosing him every day, and that was not nothing. That was, in fact, quite a lot. 3 weeks into Nathaniel's recovery, on a gray Tuesday afternoon with snow threatening again, and both boys occupied in the kitchen with Rosaria, and a bread-baking project that was going to produce, Clara suspected, something architecturally ambitious and structurally unsound. She was in the parlor, mending a tear in Owen's good shirt, when Charlie appeared at the door. Not Diego, a different man, younger, leaner, with the expression of someone delivering news he didn't want to deliver. "Mrs. Cade, ma'am." He had his hat in both hands. "There's a man asking for you in town. Rode in on the eastern stage this morning. Says his name is Edmund Ashworth. Says he's your cousin." The needle stopped. Clara sat very still. The room continued around her fire in the fireplace. Snow starting outside the window, the distant sound of Owen explaining something to Rosaria with great authority, and she sat in the middle of it and felt the floor shift. "Edmund," she said. "Yes, ma'am." "He's at the hotel. Said to tell you he'd be there through Thursday." She sent the man away with thanks. She sat for another 10 minutes with the mending in her lap and the fire doing its work and the snow coming down outside, and she thought about Edmund Ashworth, older cousin Boston raised, whom she had not seen in 11 years and had not thought about in most of them. She thought about the way his smile had always been positioned slightly wrong, like a painting hung a degree off plumb. She thought about what it meant that he had come here now to find her. Then she put down the mending and went to find Nathaniel. He was in his room, which he was theoretically confined to, but sitting up in the armchair by the window with a ledger in his lap, a compromise they had negotiated earlier in the week, and which Clara had accepted on the grounds that at least it was not the office. He looked up when she came in, and something in her face made him close the ledger immediately. "What happened?" he said. She told him. She told him all of it, Edmund. The thin smile, the 11 years of silence, and what it almost certainly meant that he had appeared now 3 months after her marriage to one of the wealthiest ranchers in 3 counties. She told him without softening it, without trying to manage how it landed. She had promised herself after the second wedding vows that they hadn't taken yet, but that she already understood she would take, that there would be no more managing, no more handling things alone that were not hers alone to handle. Nathaniel listened. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "Do you think the debt is real?" he said. "No." She was certain about this, which helped. "My father was meticulous about money. He kept every receipt and every record in a box in his study, and when he died, the estate administrator found them and settled everything. I was 14, but I was there. I saw the paperwork." She paused. Edmund was not at the funeral. Nathaniel's expression was the one he got when a problem had been identified and was now being assessed. "He found out about our marriage," he said, "and he came to collect." "Yes." "Then we go to the lawyer." He was already reaching for his coat with the arm that wasn't compromised. "Henderson is sharp. If there's a fraud here, he'll find it." "Nathaniel, you're not supposed to—" "I'm well enough to sit in a lawyer's office," he said in a tone that closed that particular discussion. She looked at him, this man who had decided she was a transaction and had been discovering in small, daily increments that he was wrong, and felt the unnamed thing again. Large and warm and terrifying. "All right," she said. "In the morning?" "In the morning," he agreed. He looked at her steadily. "We'll handle it together." It was the simplest sentence. She stood in the doorway of his room and heard it and felt it settle somewhere inside her like a foundation stone, finding its level, and thought, "Yes, that's what this is. This is what we are now." "Together," she said, and went to tell Rosaria they'd need the wagon in the morning. Henderson's office smelled of pipe smoke and old paper, and Henderson himself was the kind of attorney who looked permanently skeptical, as if doubt were his natural resting state. He listened to Clara's account of Edmund's visit without interrupting. His fingers steepled his eyes on her face. When she finished, he leaned back. "How much?" he said. $12,000. "And the supposed debt, when does he claim it was incurred?" 2 years before my father's death, he says a Boston bank." Henderson exchanged a look with Nathaniel that Clara caught. The timing is convenient, Henderson said. Old enough that the records would be hard to verify quickly, recent enough that it could plausibly have accrued interest to a significant sum. He pulled a pad of paper toward him. Tell me the exact phrasing he used when he told you what would happen if you didn't pay. She told him. Henderson's expression shifted sharpened. Make sure the bank never contacts you again, he repeated. Not clear the debt, not settle your father's estate. Make sure the bank never contacts you. He wrote something down. That's not how a legitimate debt collector speaks. That's how a man speaks when he's running a confidence scheme, and he wants to make sure you don't verify his story before you've already handed over the money. Can you prove it? Nathaniel said. I can telegraph the bank and find out if such a debt exists. That alone will take a day. Henderson set down his pen. In the meantime, don't give him anything. Don't meet with him alone. If he contacts you directly, refer him to me. He looked at Nathaniel. And keep your wife close, Mr. Cade. Men who run schemes like this tend to escalate when they feel they're losing ground. They drove back to the ranch in the midday light, the sky an improbable shade of blue between the clouds, the snow from the night before sparkling on the open ground. Nathaniel handled the reins with his good arm and was quiet for most of the drive, which was usual. But there was a different quality to his quiet today. Not the closed, defended silence she'd first encountered, but something that had a little room in it. I should have married someone with no family at all, he said at one point. You did, Clara said. Edmund is not family. He's a man who shares some of my blood and none of my history. You're very certain. I'm a teacher. I understand the difference between connection and proximity. The corner of his mouth moved. What is the difference? Proximity is an accident of birth. Connection is a choice. She looked at the road ahead. Edmund and I were never connected. We just happened to be in the same family tree. Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. Is that how you see what we are? He said. A choice. The question arrived so plainly without preamble that it caught her off guard. She looked at him. He was watching the road, not her. Yes, she said. That's exactly how I see it. He nodded once slowly, the way he did when something had been confirmed rather than revealed. They did not speak again until the ranch came into sight. But the quality of the silence between them had changed again, was warmer now, more inhabitable. Like a room where someone had finally opened a window. They found chaos at the ranch. Rosaria met them at the door with her hands twisted together and her face taut, which was sufficiently unprecedented that Clara was already running before the woman spoke. It's Henry, Rosaria said. The creek. No. The little boy lay in his own bed, soaking wet his lips, faintly blue, terrifyingly still. Diego had his hat in his hands and his face the color of old ash. He got away from me for 3 minutes, he said. No more than that. When I got to him, he was in the deep part. He must have slipped on the bank, hit his head. I pulled him out fast as I could, but he wasn't responding. Clara was already moving. She had read it once in a medical pamphlet she'd found in the Boston Academy Library, a piece written by a naval surgeon about the revival of drowning victims. She had never expected to use it. She had retained it anyway because she retained everything, and now she pulled it from the back of her mind like a tool she hadn't known she'd need. Head back, mouth clear, compress the chest, breathe, count. The room around her did what rooms do in moments like that, shrank to the size of the thing in front of her. She was aware of Owen in the doorway, of Rosaria's voice in Spanish, of Nathaniel at her shoulder, frozen in the particular paralysis of a man who has already lost one person he could not save and cannot absorb the possibility of losing another. She was aware of all of it and gave it none of her attention. Compress, breathe, count. Henry convulsed, water, and then coughing. And then the best sound she had heard in her life, a thin, hoarse, outraged wail from a 2-year-old who was emphatically alive. Mama, Henry said, ragged, confused, reaching. Here, Clara said, gathering him up, soaking wet against her chest. Right here, I've got you. Nathaniel sat down on the edge of the bed beside them. His face was white. He put his arm around both of them, Clara and Henry, together, and pressed his forehead briefly, privately against the top of Clara's head. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Owen crept in and pressed himself against his father's other side, and for a moment the four of them were a single tangled thing, fear and relief, and something that had stopped being provisional several minutes ago and was simply undeniably a family. He's all right, Clara said to the room, to Nathaniel specifically. Because of you, he said. His voice was barely audible. Because I knew what to do and I did it. You would have done the same. I froze, he said. Flat, honest, no deflection. And then you came and put your arm around us. Clara said, that counts too. She felt him exhale against her hair, long and slow and ragged at the edges. Dr. Patterson came in the late afternoon and confirmed what Clara already knew: Henry was fine. Shaken with a small bump on his temple that would be colorful for a week, but otherwise unhurt. Also, Patterson looked at Clara over the boy's head with the same expression he'd had the morning after the attack. Second time, he said. I hope it's the last, she said. With this family, Patterson said, repacking his bag, I wouldn't count on it. That night, after both boys were asleep and Rosaria had retired and the ranch had settled into its nighttime sounds, Clara found Nathaniel on the porch. She sat beside him. She did not bring a shawl. This time it was warmer than it had been. The hard edge of winter finally beginning to soften, and they sat together in the mild dark and listened to the land. Margaret, he said after a long while, she was afraid of losing them too. Every illness, every fall, every bad dream, she'd be beside herself. I used to tell her she worried too much. Did that help? No. The ghost of a rueful look. She told me I didn't worry enough. She was right. Yes. He turned to look at her. I understand now what she meant. You love someone and the fear is proportional. You can't have one without the other. Clara looked back at him. Is that what's happening? She said carefully. You're frightened because I have people to lose again, he said. All three of you. He said it simply as if it were a fact he had been working up to, stating for some time, and had finally arrived at the words. I told myself this was a transaction. I told myself I could keep it contained, practical. I have been very thoroughly proven wrong. The night was soft around them. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called and was answered. I'm not asking you for anything, Clara said. I want to be clear about that. You don't owe me. I know I don't owe you. He shifted to face her more fully. That's not what this is. This is Bob. He paused, and she could see him searching for the right construction, this man who was better at action than at words. This is me telling you that whatever this started as, it isn't that anymore. For me. He looked at her steadily. I needed you to know that. Clara sat with that for a moment. What is it then? She said. What is it? He thought about it seriously, the way he thought about all serious things. Something I don't have a word for yet, he said. But real, it's real. She looked at the darkness where the mountains were invisible now in the night. Yes, she said, I know. They sat together until the cold finally drove them in, and when they walked through the door, Nathaniel's hand found the small of her back, brief, barely there, a half-second of contact, and she felt it like something being decided. She went to bed in Margaret's room and stared at the ceiling and thought, you came here to survive. And you have. And something else has happened too. Something you didn't plan for, and you don't know yet where it goes. She thought, but you're not afraid of it. She turned on her side and closed her eyes, and for the first time since she'd arrived at Crow Creek Ranch, slept without waiting for something to go wrong. Henderson's telegram came back in 2 days. Clara was in the kitchen with Rosaria and the boys when Diego brought it in, and she read it standing at the table while Owen watched her face with the alertness of a child who has learned to read rooms. No record of any loan bearing. Whitfield. Name stop, letterhead forged, stop. Advise, contact sheriff, stop. Proceed as planned, stop. Henderson. Good news, Owen said. Not a question. Very good news, Clara said. She found Nathaniel in his office and handed him the telegram without preamble. He read it, set it on the desk, and looked up at him. Sheriff Dodd needs to know, he said. Diego's already writing in. And Edmund is presumably still at the hotel waiting to hear from us. Nathaniel stood, moving with more ease now than he had 2 weeks ago. The wound was healing. Well, Patterson had said, faster than expected, possibly because Nathaniel was constitutionally incapable of being still, and the activity, though inadvisable, had kept his blood moving. He crossed to the window and looked out at the yard. Do you want to be there? He said. When they arrest him, Clara thought about it, about Edmund's thin smile and the cold calculation in his eyes, about the way he'd looked at her as if she were a leverage point, a useful instrument for extracting money from a wealthy man. No, she said. I want it to be over. It was over by afternoon. Diego returned to the ranch with the news Sheriff Dodd had gone to the hotel where Edmund Ashworth had been in the process of checking out and arranging stage passage east. He had not gone quietly. He had invoked a lawyer he did not have, and a bank that did not know him, and a debt that had never existed, and none of it had made any difference. The forged letterhead had been found in his bags. 5 to 10 years, Diego said. Henderson thinks. Clara sat in the parlor and let the information settle. She had expected to feel something cleaner triumph or relief or simple satisfaction at a problem resolved. Instead, she felt tired in a deep and specific way, the tiredness of someone who has had to fight hard for something that should never have been threatened in the first place. Owen came and sat beside her. He didn't say anything for a while, just sat close enough that his shoulder was against her arm in the way he'd lately been doing. Not leaning on her exactly, just being adjacent, claiming proximity, the way children claim things quietly and without announcement. He was your family, Owen said finally. He shared my blood, Clara said. That's different. Owen considered this. Is Pa my family? Yes, your actual family. And you? Clara looked at him. His dark eyes were serious and watchful and entirely his father's. If you'll have me, she said. Owen didn't smile. He almost never smiled, preferring the more complicated expressions, but something in his face settled. I decided something, he said. Tell me. I'm going to call you Mama. He said it the way he said most important things, plainly without drama. Not instead of my first mama. In addition to, Rosa says the heart doesn't run out of room. I think she's right. Clara put her arm around him, and he let her, leaning in slightly, the way a plant leans toward light without being aware that it is doing so. Rosaria, Clara said, is almost always right. I know, Owen said. Don't tell her. She'll be insufferable. Clara laughed, a real laugh, surprise out of her, and Owen looked pleased with himself in the small way he had, and they sat together in the parlor, while the afternoon light came through the windows, and Henry napped, and the ranch went about its business outside. That evening, Clara found Nathaniel in his office, but not working. He was sitting with a glass of whiskey untouched on the desk in front of him, looking at the photograph on the mantel, the one of Margaret, fair-haired and serious, that had been there since Clara arrived. She sat down across from him. Owen told me something today, she said. What? He's decided to call me Mama. Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. Something moved across his face, complex and unresolvable. How do you feel about that? He said. Like I've been given something I haven't earned yet, Clara said honestly, but like I intend to earn it. He looked at her. You pulled my 2-year-old out of a creek and my son from behind a wall of grief that I'd been trying to scale for 2 years, he said. That seems like earning to me. I pulled our 2-year-old, Clara said quietly. The word landed in the room between them. He looked at her, that long, careful look. Yes, he said. You did. She glanced at the photograph. Tell me about her, she said. Not because I need to know, but because I think you need to say it. He looked at the photograph for a moment. She was fearless, he said. Not reckless, fearless. She felt the fear and walked through it anyway. She used to say that the brave thing and the right thing were usually the same thing, and that most people confuse bravery with the absence of fear. She was right, Clara said. I know. His voice was quiet. She would have liked you. She respected people who said true things. He paused. Owen said something similar, apparently. He did. Clara folded her hands in her lap. Nathaniel, I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly, even if you think the honest answer will complicate things. He waited. Are you holding yourself at a distance from me, she said, because you're afraid that if you stop, you'll have to admit that this isn't a transaction anymore. And that's frightening because the last time you let yourself need someone, you lost her. The silence was long. Yes, he said. No defense. Just the word. Clara nodded slowly. I thought so. She looked at her hands. I need you to know something then. I came here with nothing. I came here desperate and frightened and willing to agree to almost anything to survive. And I have been choosing every single day since then to stay, not because I have to, not because the arrangement requires it, but because... She stopped, looked at him directly. Because I am falling in love with you and your sons and this life, and I would like, if it's all right with you, to stop pretending otherwise. The room was very still. Nathaniel stood. He moved around the desk with the careful deliberateness of a man who has decided something and is now acting on it, and he came to stand in front of her, and he held out his hand. She took it. He drew her to her feet, and they stood close together in the lamplight, and he looked at her with nothing managed and nothing held back. "Marry me again," he said. "We're already married." "Not like this," his voice was low. "Not in a judge's office with you wearing a borrowed dress and a dead woman's ring. Marry me because you're choosing me. In front of the boys, in front of the town." He brought her hand up and held it against his chest. "Marry me because you want to." Clara felt the tears before she was aware of making the decision to cry. She did not wipe them away. "That's a yes," she said. He kissed her, then carefully at first, then less so, his free hand cupping her face with the tentativeness of someone doing something they had forbidden themselves to want, and Clara closed her eyes and felt the unnamed thing finally find its name. This. This is what it is. This is what it has been becoming. When they broke apart, he pressed his forehead against hers. "I've been an idiot," he said. "You've been frightened," she said. "Those are different things." In my case, they were the same. She pulled back enough to look at him. "Owen," she said, "he needs to know it's real, not just the arrangement, that you chose this." "I know." He didn't let go of her hand. "We'll tell him together." They found Owen at the kitchen table, apparently having a conversation with Rosaria about whether the bread had enough salt. He looked up when they came in, both of them together, which was new, and his eyes moved between their faces with rapid intelligence. Rosaria made herself scarce with the efficiency of a woman who had been managing this household for 30 years and knew exactly when to disappear. Nathaniel sat down across from his son. "I need to tell you something," he said, "about Clara and me." Owen put his elbows on the table and his chin in his hands. "You love her," he said. Nathaniel blinked. "Owen," Clara said. "I'm not stupid," Owen said without heat. "I've been watching. You look at her the way you used to look at Mama, but different. Quieter, like it surprised you." Nathaniel looked at his son for a long moment. "When did you get this perceptive?" he said. "I've always been perceptive. You just weren't paying attention." Owen sat up straighter. "Are you going to get properly married because the first one doesn't count?" "You were both miserable." "We were not," Clara started. "You were both miserable," Owen said firmly. "I was there." Nathaniel looked at Clara over the boy's head. His expression was something she hadn't seen from him before, open and helpless and amused all at once. "Yes," he said to Owen, "we're going to get properly married." Owen nodded. "Good," he said. "Henry will throw the flowers. He's been practicing with pine cones." The second wedding was held on a Sunday with half of Caldwell Creek in attendance, which was more than Clara had expected, in which she attributed partly to genuine goodwill and partly to the fact that small towns have a limited supply of events and do not waste the good ones. She wore a dress that Rosaria had apparently been conspiring with 3 different women in town to produce deep blue silk fitted at the waist with a pattern of tiny white flowers at the cuffs that caught the light when she moved. She wore her hair loose, which she never did because Owen had told her to, and his reasoning, "You always wear it up to be proper. But today you don't have to be proper, today you're just happy," had been irrefutable. Henry, who had been briefed extensively and had apparently retained very little of the briefing, threw the petals with such focused enthusiasm that he ran out halfway down the makeshift aisle and pivoted without embarrassment to picking them up and throwing them again. The room laughed. Nathaniel, standing at the front with Diego beside him, watched his 2-year-old retrieving petals from the floorboards with an expression that Clara would remember for the rest of her life, unguarded and warm and entirely helplessly fond. Then he looked up and saw her, and the expression did not close. Judge Harlan performed the ceremony for the second time in 3 months. Clara wondered if he'd expected this, if some part of him had seen it coming from the beginning, had known that when you put 2 stubborn, broken people in the same house and gave them children to love and dangers to survive, the outcome was not really in question. She thought perhaps that was what he was thinking about when he smiled just slightly, just at the corner of his mouth during the vows. This time, when he pronounced them, husband and wife, Nathaniel kissed her like he meant it. Owen cheered. Henry, not certain what was happening, but clear on the emotional register, shouted something joyful and unintelligible. The room erupted, and somewhere in the noise, Clara heard Rosaria crying with the full commitment of a woman who has been waiting for this moment for considerably longer than anyone involved has been aware. At the reception held in the ranch house, which Rosaria had transformed over the preceding week into something that looked like it had always been intended for celebrations, people crowded around with congratulations and the particular warmth of a community that has decided to claim someone. The women who had not called on Clara at the courthouse wedding called on her now. The men who had been politely neutral were cordial in a way that had substance in it. Mrs. Harmon from the dry goods store pressed her hand and said, "We were wrong about you, and we should say so," which was the kind of apology Clara had not expected to receive and which landed somewhere tender. Harold Briggs appeared briefly near the refreshment table, looking as if he would have preferred to be somewhere else entirely, and cleared his throat and said, "The school board may have acted in haste." And Clara looked at him pleasantly and said, "They may have." And that was as much as either of them needed to say. Late in the evening, after the guests had thinned and the boys had been put to bed, Henry entirely asleep before his head hit the pillow, Owen lasting long enough to say with drowsy satisfaction, "This was a much better wedding." And be entirely correct, Clara found Nathaniel on the porch. He was looking out at the land. The moon was up clear and white over the Laramie Range, throwing the whole yard into silver and shadow. Clara stood beside him and followed his gaze. "I have something for you," he said. He produced a small box from his coat pocket. She took it, opened it. Inside, a ring. Not Margaret's ring. She'd noticed him remove it from the mantel box weeks ago and had not asked. This was something new, a plain gold band with a single small diamond, elegant and simple. "It's yours," he said, "not borrowed, not from anyone else." Clara took Margaret's ring from her finger. She had come to think of it not with resentment, but with a kind of tender awareness, a reminder of what this family had come from, and placed it carefully in the box. She put on the new ring. It fit exactly. "How did you know the size?" she said. "Rosaria," he said. "Of course." She looked at the ring on her finger, catching moonlight, and then at him, this man who had opened his door to a frozen woman and made a transaction and gotten considerably more than he'd bargained for in all the best ways. "I love you," she said, simply because that was what it was. He pulled her close and she went, and they stood together in the cold silver night while the ranch breathed around them, the horses in the barn, the hands in the bunkhouse, the sleeping boys upstairs, and the Wyoming sky was enormous and clear above them, and everything for this moment was exactly right. "I love you," he set his lips on her hair, "more than I thought I was still capable of." "You were always capable," she said. "You just needed the right reasons." He kissed her, and the coyotes called somewhere in the distance, and the moon moved a degree across the sky, and Crow Creek Ranch kept its steady turning through another Wyoming night. Inside, a small boy dreamed. Another slept without nightmares for the fourth night in a row. And Clara Cade stood in her husband's arms and understood that she had come to this place with nothing and built something that could not be taken from her, not by a school board, not by a storm, not by a man with forged letterhead, not by armed men on fast horses, not by anything that came from outside, because what she had built was not a position or a contract. It was a family, and families once made are not unmade by the world. They are only made stronger by it. She breathed in cold air and held on and let herself believe in the spring that was coming. It was always coming. Spring arrived in Wyoming the way it always does, grudgingly, in fits and starts, the snow retreating and then returning, as if it hadn't quite decided to leave the ground softening in patches and then freezing again overnight. And then one morning, Clara woke to the sound of water running off the eaves and something in the air that was definitively, unmistakably green. She stood at the bedroom window, her window, hers and Nathaniel's, both a fact that still sometimes caught her off guard, with its plain domestic reality, and watched him in the south pasture below, moving through the pale morning light, with Diego pointing at something on the fence line, his coat open despite the temperature, because he had apparently decided that winter was over and was declining to be told otherwise. He had been back to full capacity for 3 weeks, a fact that Patterson had verified with some surprise and attributed to what he called constitutional stubbornness, and which Clara attributed to the same quality but preferred to call determination. The ranch was moving again, the hands back to full rotation, the scattered herd being regrouped, the burned section of fence rebuilt. The Morrison spread to the south, hit hardest in the raids, was recovering with assistance from the surrounding ranches, which was how things were done in this country. You helped, and then you were helped, and the ledger never needed to be spoken of directly. Downstairs, she could hear Owen's voice. He was explaining something to Henry with the patience of a born teacher, which Clara had noted and which pleased her in a way that was complicated. She was making him into something, this boy. She could see it happening, the shape of the person he was going to be, and it was a good shape. She went down. "What are you two doing?" she said from the kitchen doorway. "I'm teaching him letters," Owen said, not looking up. He had chalk and the small blackboard Clara had acquired from Miss Paulson, and a look of serious professional concentration. "He knows A through F, but he keeps saying E is F and F is E. They're similar shapes. They're completely different." Henry, untroubled by this pedagogical debate, was eating a piece of bread and occasionally pointing at letters with the attitude of someone who considers the entire exercise optional. "F," Henry said, pointing. "E," Owen said. "F. That is an E, Henry." Henry looked at Owen. "F," he said cheerfully, and bit the bread. Owen turned to Clara with an expression of profound professional suffering. "Is this what you feel like when I'm being difficult?" "Daily," Clara said. "I apologize." "Accepted." She kissed the top of his head, which he tolerated with the dignity of someone who has decided that mothers are permitted certain things, and went to start the coffee. Through the kitchen window, she watched Nathaniel cross the yard toward the house, and something warm and ordinary moved through her, the same thing she felt every morning when she saw him familiar, now no less significant for the familiarity. She had learned in these months that love was not diminished by domesticity. It was in fact deepened by it, by the accumulation of shared mornings and small decisions and daily arguments about whether Owen needed a warmer coat and whether Henry was old enough for a horse. The door opened. Cold air then, Nathaniel, then the smell of barn and early spring. "Coffee," she said, "please." He came to stand beside her at the stove, closer than necessary, which was a habit of his that she had come to treasure, and looked at the scene in the next room, Owen patiently, persistently teaching the alphabet to a 2-year-old who had strong opinions about letter identity. "He's going to be a teacher," Nathaniel said. "I know. Like you. Better than me, probably." Clara handed him his coffee. "He has more patience." "He gets that from you." She looked at him. "He gets it from watching what patience accomplishes," she said. "That could be from either of us." Nathaniel considered this with the seriousness he brought to most things. Then he nodded once, accepting the point. "Diego wants to talk about expanding the north pasture," he said. "Buying the Henderson parcel if old Henderson is finally ready to sell. It would nearly double our grazing." "What does Diego think it's worth?" "Less than Henderson thinks it's worth. That's the problem. Make him an offer he can't quite refuse and give him 3 days to think about it. He'll come down." Nathaniel looked at her over the rim of his cup. "How do you know that?" "Because he's been trying to sell that land for 4 years and nobody's made a serious offer. He doesn't want to lose his best one." A pause, then, "Diego has been after me to do that for 2 months. Diego was right. He frequently is." Nathaniel set down his cup and turned to face her fully, which he did when he was going to say something that mattered. "I've been thinking about something." "Tell me." "The boys, their names." He watched her face carefully. "Henry calls you Mama. Owen has been calling you that for 2 months. You are their mother, legally and in every way that matters." His voice was quiet and steady. "But the way things stand, if something happened to me, if I died and left the ranch to the boys, your position here would be dependent on their good intentions rather than law." Clara was very still. "What are you saying?" she said. "I want to change the deed. The land and the house and the operation, I want it held jointly, in both our names." He met her eyes. "This is your home. It should be yours in writing." She set down her own cup carefully. She had not expected this, not because she doubted him, but because she had taught herself over a long life of insufficient security not to expect things she had not been promised. The land, in her name, not because she was married to it, but because she had made it hers. "Nathaniel," she said. "You have earned it," he said. "More than earned it. But I'm not offering it as payment. I'm offering it because this is your home and you should have the papers that say so." He held her gaze. "You said once that connection is a choice. This is me choosing in the most permanent way I know how. Clara pressed her lips together against whatever expression was trying to escape. Yes, she said. All right, yes. He exhaled slowly the way he did when something he'd been uncertain about resolved in the right direction, and took her hand and held it for a moment with the simple, unhurried care that was, she thought, one of the things she loved most about him. Not dramatic, not performed, just real. From the next room, Owen, that's definitely F. Henry, I promise you it is E. F. We're going to be working on this for a while, Owen said to no one in particular. Clara laughed and Nathaniel's hand tightened on hers and the morning came fully in through the kitchen windows and found them exactly where they were. Summer was hard work and long days and the particular bone-deep satisfaction of work that means something. Clara taught in the mornings Owen, who was reading at a level that would have challenged the older students at her Caldwell Creek school, and Henry, who was working steadily through the alphabet and had recently reached a cordial agreement with the letters E and F, and in the afternoons she worked alongside Rosaria, learning the deep knowledge of the ranch that had nothing to do with books, how to read the sky for weather, how to judge when the creek was running high enough to be dangerous, how to put up vegetables and smoke meat, and manage the stores for a household of 7 through a Wyoming winter. Her hands changed, her arms. The softness of the Boston schoolteacher was replaced by something harder and more capable, and she did not mourn the softness. She liked the capable. In June, Diego organized the neighboring ranchers for a joint roundup, the first since the raids had disrupted the usual cooperation, and Crow Creek Ranch hosted the opening day's work. Clara cooked with Rosaria and 3 other ranch wives from dawn until dark, and discovered that she had opinions about biscuits and that other women found her opinions useful, and that the easy camaraderie of shared work was something she had been without for a very long time. "You've changed," said Alice Morrison, the wife of the neighboring rancher sitting across from Clara at the long kitchen table while their respective pots simmered. "From when I first heard about you, I mean. People said you were reserved, formal." "I was frightened," Clara said. "Of what?" Clara considered. "Of wanting things I wasn't sure I'd be allowed to keep," she said. Alice nodded slowly. And now, Clara looked out the kitchen window at the yard where Owen was demonstrating something to Henry with a stick in elaborate hand gestures and where Nathaniel had paused on his way to the barn to watch them with his arms crossed and that quiet, unguarded expression that was still months later the one she treasured most. "Now," she said, "I'm learning to trust the keeping." On their 6-month anniversary, counted from the second wedding, which they'd both agreed was the real one, Nathaniel brought a horse to the yard after breakfast. She was a chestnut mare with a white star on her forehead and an expression of mild, self-possessed intelligence. "This is Lady," Nathaniel said. "She's yours." Clara looked at the horse. The horse looked back. "I don't know how to ride," Clara said. "I know. I'm going to teach you." "That seems like a significant undertaking." "You taught Owen to read Dickens. I think we can manage riding." He helped her up, his hands at her waist, steady and sure, and stood beside the horse and talked her through it with the patience of a man who understood that learning required time, and that time was something they now had. She was terrible at it. She gripped the reins too tightly and sat too stiffly and convinced herself twice that the horse was preparing to bolt, and each time Nathaniel said calmly, "Relax your hands. She can feel what you're thinking," and each time it worked. By the end of the morning, she had managed a full circuit of the yard at a walk without catastrophe. "Well done," Nathaniel said. "I was clinging on for my life." "That's how it starts." He took the horse's reins, still looking at her with that particular look, proud and warm and a little amused. "You'll be cantering by August." "Bold claim." "I have evidence for it. You do everything stubbornly until you do it well." Clara looked down at him from the horse's back. An unfamiliar angle Nathaniel came from above, which made him look unexpectedly, almost vulnerably human. "Nathaniel," she said. I'm happy." She said it simply. I wanted to say it out loud in case it isn't obvious. He was quiet for a moment, looking up at her. Something in his face that she had learned to read, the specific softness he'd been allowing himself more freely lately, the one that had been there all along beneath the stone. "It's obvious," he said, "but I'm glad you said it anyway." The school on the ranch was Clara's idea, offered tentatively in late August over dinner, revised extensively based on Nathaniel's practical input, and implemented by October. with the quiet efficiency of a household that had learned to work together. It started small. Owen and Henry and the three children from the neighboring Morrison spread, who rode over 3 mornings a week with their older sister as escort. Then the Whitmore children joined. Then the two boys from the Reyes family in town, Diego's nephews, whose mother had been trying to find them proper schooling for 2 years. By November, there were 11 children in the Crow Creek Ranch parlor on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday mornings ranging from 4 to 12 years old, and Clara was teaching them all simultaneously in the organized chaos of the one-room school she'd always been suited for. Nathaniel built her a proper schoolroom. He did not announce this. He simply, over 3 weekends in September, converted the outbuilding behind the main house, previously used for storage, into something with good windows and proper lighting, and 12 desks that he and Diego built themselves from plans Clara had sketched on the back of a ranch ledger page. She found it on a Monday morning fully fitted. "When did you do this?" she said. "Saturdays," he said. "I was here on Saturdays. You were occupied with other things." She turned to look at him in the doorway of the small sunlit room. "You built me a school," she said. "You already had the school. I built it a room." He looked at the desks, the windows, the shelf she'd been given, without knowing it would be hers. "You said once that you'd become a teacher because it was the only work available to you. I want you to be a teacher because it's what you are." He met her eyes. This seemed like the right way to say that. Clara crossed the room and kissed him, not tentatively, not briefly, and he put his arms around her and held on with the particular thoroughness of a man who has decided he is not letting go. "You could have just said it," she told him when they separated. "I'm better at building things than he said. You know that." She looked around the small, perfect room. The good light, the solid desks, the shelf waiting for books, and thought about what it meant to be loved in the language of someone who builds rather than speaks, and decided that it was in fact more than sufficient. On their first anniversary, the second wedding, the real one, Nathaniel took her out to the North Road. He brought the wagon at mid-morning, both boys in the back with Rosa, making them behave, and they drove north in the thin December light until he pulled up the horses at a spot on the road that looked to Clara like every other spot on the road. "Here," he said. She looked at him. "This is where Charlie found you," he said. "The first night." Clara looked at the road, at the land around it, wake and open and enormous, in the way Wyoming is enormous, all sky and distance, and the sharp teeth of the mountains at the horizon. She had been here before. Of course, she had walked this road many times in the years since, but she had never been here knowing what it was. "I was about to stop," she said quietly. "I was so cold. I went down in the snow and I thought about my father. I thought I was going to die there." "You weren't." His voice was quiet. "You got up." "I got up because I'm stubborn." "Yes." He reached over and took her hand. "That's why you got up. And that stubbornness has been the great fortune of my life." Clara looked at the road and at the scion, at the mountains, and at the man beside her. This man who had opened his door to a dying woman and made a transaction, and found, as she had found, that transactions are not the end of things, but only the beginning. From the wagon bed, Owen, "Are we going to sit here all day?" "Yes," Nathaniel said. "Why?" "Because it matters." He didn't look away from Clara. "Some places matter. This is one of them." Owen was quiet for a moment. Then, "Is this where you met Mama?" "Yes," Clara said before she'd made the decision to say it. Owen considered this. "That makes sense," he said. "It looks like a hard place. You both like hard places." Nathaniel's hand tightened on hers. "We do," he said. They sat together on the North Road, the four of them, while the December light moved over the land and the mountains held their position at the edge of the world. And Clara thought about the girl who had walked this road in the snow, desperate, alone, willing to agree to almost anything just to be warm. She thought about everything that girl had not known she was walking toward. The boys in the back of the wagon, the man beside her, the school in the outbuilding, the deed with both their names, the extraordinary, improbable, permanent thing that a transaction had become. "Come on," Owen said finally. "Henry's getting cold." "Henry is wrapped in 4 blankets, Nathaniel said. "He's getting cold philosophically," Owen said. Clara laughed, and Nathaniel turned the horses around, and they drove home through the thin winter light. Home, which was a word that had once meant a rented room in a schoolhouse and now meant something else entirely. Something that had rooms and people, in morning coffee, in difficult arithmetic, in a chestnut mare named Lady, in a child who had decided to keep her. Home, which she had built from nothing, was someone who had also built it from nothing, in which they were still building day by day in all the ways that matter. Spring came again the following year and the year after that. Each one easier in some ways, harder in others, droughts and the hard winters that Wyoming saves for the people who have decided to stay, and a sickness that ran through the cattle herd and cost them 3 weeks of sleep and a fifth of the year's profits in which they recovered from because they had learned together how to recover. Owen turned 10 and demanded a more serious education, and Clara wrote to the Boston Academy and got him the books he needed and discovered that teaching a gifted 10-year-old and running a household and managing a ranch school simultaneously was harder than she'd anticipated and more satisfying than she could have predicted. Henry turned 4 and started asking questions that nobody could answer, which was an excellent sign. He called Nathaniel Pa and Clara Mama and seemed to consider that the arrangement was working well, which it was. Rosaria, who had been threatening to retire for as long as anyone could remember, did not retire. She trained 2 of the younger women from the Morrison spread in the ranch kitchen and expanded her domain and remained in all essential ways the person who actually ran everything. Diego bought the Henderson parcel not for Crow Creek Ranch, but for himself, which Clara had suggested and Nathaniel had arranged, and which Diego had initially refused and then on reflection accepted. He broke ground on his own house in July of the second year, and Clara and the women of the neighboring ranches came and helped him choose where the window should go, and Nathaniel and the men helped him build the walls. And when it was done, Diego stood in the doorway of his own property for the first time and looked at it with an expression that Clara recognized as the one she'd had standing in the small schoolroom after Nathaniel built it. "This is mine. I have earned this. I am staying." On the 3rd anniversary of their second wedding, Nathaniel gave her a book. She opened it in the lamplight of their room and found that it was not a store-bought book, but a hand-sewn one, 40 pages of good paper bound in brown leather, with the words Crow Creek Ranch, Clara Cade, 1883, written on the first page in Nathaniel's handwriting, which was angular and deliberate and thoroughly his. The pages after it were blank. She looked at him. "Owen's idea," he said. "He said you'd been recording lessons and observations in loose papers for 2 years, and they kept getting lost. He said you needed a proper place to put things." Clara turned the blank pages. 40 of them. Room for years. "He's been talking to you about my papers," she said. "He talks to me about everything," Nathaniel said. "He decided at some point that I was worth talking to." A pause. "I think that's your doing." Clara closed the book and held it in her lap and looked at her husband. Older now, a few more lines, the silver spreading further at his temples, and something in his face that had not been there the first night as she'd seen it. Something open and permanent in hers. "I love you," she said. "I know," he said. "I love you too." He said it the way he said everything that mattered, simply without performance, with the full weight of meaning behind it. Every day more. She came to sit beside him on the edge of the bed, and he put his arm around her, and they sat quietly the way people sit who do not need to fill the silence between them, who have learned that being together is enough and more than enough. Outside, the Wyoming night was doing what it always did, enormous and clear and indifferent and beautiful, the stars in their positions, the mountains where they had always been. Inside a lamp, 2 people, the book of blank pages. The life that had been built from a proposition on a cold night from 2 broken people who had found that broken things, given the right conditions and the right company, do not stay broken. Clara opened the book to the first blank page. She picked up her pen. She began.